How's it going, everybody? I hope you're all doing well out there. Okay, so Will Durant spent over 50 years researching and writing an 11-volume history of civilization. Now, it's not unexpected that people would want to know which individual and which ideas stood out in his mind as being the greatest or the most influential. They asked him all the time. And he eventually responded by crafting a small series of essays containing his own personal rankings of the following: the 10 greatest thinkers, the 10 greatest poets, the 100 best books for education, the 10 peaks of human progress, and the 12 vital dates in world history. Now, I thought I'd run through his list of the 10 greatest thinkers. Again, it's important to keep in mind, though, that as Durant himself says, that this book is a brief tribute to the intellectual and cultural giants of history. In other words, it's not an academic survey, but rather it's a personal reflection. It's a distillation of his lifelong study of philosophy and history and literature and civilization. Okay, but before I begin, we should probably know something about what kind of criteria Durant uses when he lists these greatest thinkers. Well, so first of all, he says that he's looking for originality and scope, and for the veracity and depth of each thinker's thought. And then he's looking at the extent of the influence of their thoughts on the lives of others. He says that only by looking at actual and overall influence can he avoid personal prejudice. Oh, and one more thing. When Durant uses the term thinker, he means something pretty specific. He means he's looking at those people who influenced others not through their actions or their policies, but only through their thinking. So ultimately, he has in mind just basically philosophers and scientists. Okay, so who's first on the list? And by the way, I don't think this is in order of importance, just top 10. So first on the list, it's Confucius. So Durant places Confucius among the top greatest thinkers in human history. Not because he was original in a dramatic revolutionary sense, but because of his extraordinary influence and practical wisdom. Durant admires how Confucius avoided abstract speculation and how he wasn't concerned with the afterlife or metaphysics or gods. Instead, he focused on how to be a good person right in the here and now. How to concentrate on the cultivation of self, how to live with decency and with order, how to live an ethical and harmonious life. Okay, so number 2 on the list, the ancient Greek philosopher Plato. So Durant praises Plato for his seeking of an elusive reality and for his worship of beauty and truth and for the way he clothed his work in art. And in particular, he praises Plato's masterpiece, The Republic. And that's because in there, Durant says, you will find absolutely everything. You'll find metaphysics, theology, ethics, psychology, educational theory, political theory, theory of art, feminism, communism, socialism, libertarian education, aristocracy, democracy, and even psychoanalysis. And as to Plato's influence, well, how about the fact that he founded the Academy, the foundation of modern university, and the fact that thousands of students still study him today? Okay, so who's number 3? Well, it's Plato's student of 17 years, Aristotle. So basically, Durant describes Aristotle as the most comprehensive and influential thinker in Western history. The one with the greatest range. If Plato is a dreamer, if he's an idealist, then Aristotle is the scientist and the builder, the one who tries to map out the entire universe with logic and observation. Aristotle, in other words, tried to know absolutely everything. And you know what? he came pretty close. He wasn't just a philosopher, he was an encyclopedia. He was a biologist, he was a logician, a political theorist, a literary critic, a physicist, a metaphysician, and an ethicist. He studied everything from the structure of animals to the structure of governments. As Durant says, the history of science begins with the encyclopedic labor of the tireless Aristotle. And that might be his greatest influence. Beginning at Alexandria and Rome, Aristotle's work laid the foundation of the advancing science to come. Okay, number 4. Well, it's St. Thomas Aquinas. So why him? Well, Durant acknowledges that Aquinas didn't invent a new system of thought in the way that, like, Aristotle did. But that doesn't matter because his brilliance lies in a different kind of intellectual boldness. Namely, he brought together two seemingly incompatible worlds, the rationalism of Greek thought and the spiritualism or the spiritual doctrines of Christianity. At a time when the church dominated intellectual life and philosophy was often viewed with suspicion or even fear, Aquinas boldly argued that reason is not the enemy of faith, that the two could and should work together. As Durant says, Aquinas flung a frail bridge of reason across the chasms between knowledge and belief. In this way, Durant says that Aquinas shaped the trajectory of Western thought for centuries to come. Oh, and as for further influence, Durant reminds us that Aquinas' philosophy is, well, it's the official system of the most powerful church in Christendom. Okay, number 5 on the list. Well, that belongs to Copernicus. Now, this one needs the least justification. So, what did Copernicus do? Well, to quote Durant himself, this is what he says. He says, "By the magic of his mathematics, Copernicus transformed a geocentric and anthropocentric universe, a world that revolved around the earth and man, into a kaleidoscope of planets and stars in which earth seemed but a moment's precipitation of a floating nebula." Enough said. No book in history has created a greater revolution. From now on, heaven becomes mere sky and space and nothingness. Okay, number 6. And this is Sir Francis Bacon. So Durant praises Bacon as the father of modern science. And he does this not because Bacon performed experiments like other scientists before him, but because he laid the groundwork for the empirical method, which is the idea that knowledge should come from observation and experimentation and inductive reasoning rather than from authority and tradition. Durant also emphasizes how Bacon's vision was not just theoretical, it was also very practical. In other words, Bacon, Durant says, promoted the resolute extension of the mastery of man over the conditions of his life. In other words, Bacon believed that knowledge should serve humanity by improving life and by increasing comfort and by reducing suffering. In this way, Bacon is tremendously influential in the sense that his writings helped turn many away from abstract metaphysics and speculation and toward methodology and evidence and practical results. Okay, well, on to number 7. Number 7 on that list belongs to Sir Isaac Newton. Now, as it was with Copernicus, the greatness of thought and discovery is evident. With Newton, Durant says, came a new perspective or discovery of reality, namely the clockwork universe. In other words, Newton showed that the cosmos is not chaotic or mysterious, but it's rational and it's governed by discoverable laws, that there's a hidden mathematical order to it that can be revealed. Well, that's what he reveals in his masterpiece, where he used mathematical formulas to describe physical laws, most famously the law of universal gravitation and the laws of motion. In terms of future influence, Newton's work went on to fuel the Enlightenment, of course, and laid the foundation for modern science and engineering and technology. Okay, getting close to the end now. So, number 8 is Voltaire. Now, Durant admits that Voltaire didn't so much discover anything new, but what makes him so important is that he not only made ideas more radiant and clear, but he relentlessly challenged them as well. Voltaire questioned authority, like the church and the monarchy, and he used irony and satire and humor to do it. We see maybe the best example of this in his famous novel, Candide, where he ridiculed the idea that all is for the best in the best of all possible worlds. Here he wasn't just poking fun, he was exposing the cruelty behind complacent optimism and religious fanaticism more broadly. And what makes Voltaire so exceptional is that he did all this not with a sword, but with a pen. As Durant says, Voltaire is the fountainhead of intellectual enlightenment of our time. Okay, now number 9, the great Immanuel Kant. So I think Durant admires Kant for at least a couple of important reasons. So first of all, he sees Kant as a sort of Copernicus of philosophy. Just like Copernicus changed our view of the universe by showing that the earth revolves around the sun, Kant revolutionized philosophy by arguing that the mind plays an active role in shaping our experience. And I think that Durant also admires how Kant carved out space for both science and faith. More specifically, Kant showed that while we can know the world of appearances through science, we can never fully know things as they are in themselves. Now, what this ultimately meant for Kant is that reason had limits, and that some truths, like God and like freedom and the soul, they lay outside the reach of scientific proof. Now, this prompts Durant to end his piece on Kant by saying that Kant had won the battle against materialism and atheism, and the world could hope again. Okay, well, so the last one on the list, number 10, is no surprise to anybody, Charles Darwin. And what did he do? Well, not too much. As Durant begins, he just offered up a totally different world picture than the one before. Before we had supposed a world of order, moving under divine guidance, where every virtue would find its fit reward. But with Darwin's theory of natural selection, suddenly the world turned red and everything became a scene of slaughter and strife. As Durant says, the human race was no longer the favored creation of a benevolent deity. No, it was a species of ape. This is why Darwin will stand as a turning point in the intellectual development of Western civilization, and it's why we'll have to date from 1859, the beginning of modern thought. Bye for now.